So I'm right outside my office building, and I just remember this phrase from the book when it said, "Do you want to work for your dreams or someone else's?" And I found it really hard to get off the bus at that point and go into the office, and that really hit me hard.
Darrell, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. I love sitting down for conversations like this. You have such a wealth of experience to offer, and you've been in this field of bid and proposal management for quite some time. So let's start there. Tell me a bit of your career journey and how you've gotten to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I've been in bidding for I think over 20 years, although I did stop counting a little while back. Yeah, I started out, I think like most people, I accidentally fell into it. I got involved in an RFP along with a team of people that got thrown together to deal with this thing we'd never seen before, and I realised that nobody had a clue what they were doing. And in fact, in our first meeting, nobody else had even read the documentation. So I kind of took control of it at the time. And then I remember thinking, this is great. I think I found a niche that nobody else can do. And it was only many years later I discovered things like the APMP and the enormous profession that was out there of people who were way more capable than I was. And so then got into the sort of qualification path of it. And following all that kind of career progression through APMP and other training that I could find.
Well, that's incredible. Don't undersell yourself. 20 years of experience is something to be proud of. And I would guess that anyone listening to this conversation might have similar stories to share. I've talked to a lot of different bidding professionals who say they kind of fell into it. Now, there's an interesting wrinkle in your story, which is that you were in-house for many, many years, but then just about 8 years ago, you decided to go out on your own. So I have to ask, how did that happen? What was the trigger that made you make that move?
Yeah, there's a bit of story behind that, I guess. I had started thinking about it when I went to an APMP conference, and there was a session with two people who were kind of talking about the pros and cons of being in-house or being freelance. And it really kind of got me thinking. I had a lot of interesting conversations afterwards. My boss was there too, so I couldn't say too much. But it did get me thinking. And then a little while later, I got really into listening to audiobooks on my commute into work. And so I'm right outside my office building, and I just remember this phrase from the book when it said, "Do you want to work for your dreams or someone else's?" And I found it really hard to get off the bus at that point and go into the office, and that really hit me hard. But I was also very lucky, and I had an opportunity. Somebody had approached me, was interested in potentially hiring me for a full-time position. I spoke to them and said, look, I've been thinking, how would you feel about hiring me instead as a freelance contractor and working with you that way? And luckily they said that was an even better idea for them. And so I started that way. I got straight into it, had my first contract, and I've been doing that ever since.
I love that story and really the power of those moments, right?
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where you can think back on the turning point. So I absolutely love that. And you know what? You took a bet on yourself. Your first client took a bet on you,
Yeah.
and now 8 years later, here you are. What have you noticed that's really changed over the past couple years in the work that you're doing with your clients and some of the things that are top of mind for them?
Yeah, so for me, it's quite specialized, really. When I first went freelance, I thought I would be a freelance bid manager. I'd still be working in, RFP response primarily, but I'd also got really interested in the technology side of things, in automation and all of that kind of stuff around applied to bidding. And I hoped I would get a little bit of that kind of work to keep things interesting. But as it turned out, that's the only thing I've done since, become a technology specialist. And I mean, look, how much has the technology in bidding changed over the last 8 years, from something that I think was a little bit fringe, to something that's almost every day. And now, of course, in the last couple of years, we can't help but talk about that 2-letter acronym.
Can you get more specific around like what specific types of things are you thinking along those lines, different use cases or parts of the bidding process where you see that opportunity?
Yeah, sure. I think so. I think one of the big ones is I hear almost everybody complain that chasing SMEs, contributors for answers in bids is uh, one of the most tedious, frustrating, and really low value add from the point of view of the bid professional. Right, we're not really doing very much of any value at that point. We're just chasing somebody else to do their job. So I think automating that kind of process, taking that away so that we don't have to worry about that anymore, and we can focus more on the thinking and the strategy behind bidding. I think those are the places where we'll see AI have the biggest impact for the bid profession, certainly.
Well, on that point, how much does technology solve it all? And I ask you, so I'm challenging you because I've talked to customers and heard some really great best practices around SME engagement. So I think there's a role for technology, but AI is not the full savior if you don't have the relationships and the cadences and the expectation. What's your view on that?
I mean, definitely right. It's a human first thing, but I think that the difficulty can often be that we end up where we're so busy, we're working on bids, that the only time we speak to contributors is when we need something from them. And then we're those people who are setting them work that they're probably not expecting to do. It's usually not written anywhere in their job description that they have to contribute to bids, even though we all recognise that they do. And then we're the ones who are endlessly hassling them while they have higher priority stuff that they're working on. And so it's a relationship that's based on us giving them work and then complaining that they didn't do the work that we set them. I think if we can just automate the process behind that, then one of the things that we can do is spend more time working on the relationship in the background. So when we speak to contributors, we're not hassling them for what they can bring to us, but we're speaking to them at a time when we can talk to them about what we can do for them. And that sets up a relationship that then they're more likely to contribute happily to us when we need them.
Bidding proposal management is really kind of at the heart of really all of this organizational information. It's not just a bid or an RFP. Oftentimes there are security questionnaires or AI assessments or even just one-off questions that, a field team might be responding to on a call or an email. How do you think about really harnessing that information to extend to a broader spectrum of response use cases, and what's the opportunity there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that I really first loved about getting into the bid profession was that I worked in a medium-sized kind of business. I was the proposal center in that business. And very quickly, you become the go-to person for any kind of knowledge request, because if you don't know exactly who to go to, the bid team is going to be a really good choice. They will either know the answer or they'll definitely know who to go and ask. And I quite liked that role at the time. I thought that that made me important, I think, in the organization. And I just enjoyed kind of like learning that kind of knowledge and being the wisest person in the house. But the problem is it's sort of unsustainable and it's unscalable. I think then we need to find a way of sharing that knowledge, but also reducing the burden on the people who have it in the first place. So one thing I see in a lot of people that I work with now is they have a couple of experts in particular areas, perhaps legal or compliance or some technical aspect. What you end up with is everybody kind of jumping on these few experts and them having to repeat the same answers over and over again. I think if you can then take that knowledge, bring it into a centrally managed location, and then really properly curate it so that everybody can find it, then you make it much easier for the people who are looking for the information. It's at their fingertips, and then they can trust that it is current and correct. And it's much easier for the experts who originally knew that information because they're no longer being hassled all of the time by various people for the same thing. And again, there's a process that they can trust that will be managed for them. And the whole thing then just works much more smoothly and efficiently for the entire organization.
Now, AI could play a role here too. We're seeing that in our business. What have you seen in terms of, beyond the curation, but actually kind of opening the door for others to tap into that base? Like where do you see organizations using AI to do that?
I've certainly, in the last few years, I think I've seen people go from talking about it and being really fascinated by what it can, and very often actually there's a lot of talk about what it can't do that I hear. And then I think that's moved more towards sort of tentatively experimenting with it, and then really trying to explore what it actually might be able to do. And I think that has changed the game a little bit, because I think once people start to see what it is and truly isn't capable of, and where they still fit into the process as a human and as still the most advanced intelligence in that particular partnership, then I think it feels a lot safer, and it feels a lot more like it might be a benefit. So I think we've kind of moved from a fear of being replaced by AI towards somewhere where I think people are starting to see how it might augment them. What'll follow on from that is a slight change in attitude from purely how is it going to save people time, much more towards, well, how is it actually just going to make them better at their jobs?
I think what's interesting and what we're seeing with customers is that you have organizations who've tried to kind of like build their own chatbot on top of every possible piece of content in the organization. And they'll compare that to like the AI in our product that sits on top of the curated knowledge base, and there's no comparison. Like the curated knowledge base wins every time. And so, but it really, I think anyone who believes that content management doesn't matter in a world where AI has so much opportunity and perspective, like I fundamentally question that. I don't know about you.
I completely agree. I think we always say to people, we have to remember that AI it's a guessing engine. It's just trying to guess the next best word in a sequence. But I think then when you kind of point it at a set of content and say, okay, now I want you to guess, but based only on a limited context of these things, those guesses are always going to be much better. It's like trying to answer a multiple choice question in an exam compared to a really open-ended one. The chances you're going to pick exactly the right set of answers much higher when you've got a limited set to choose from. Yeah, absolutely. Content management is still going to be as important as ever. And I think probably more important because that context is going to become absolutely vital. We're going to need to understand exactly what are we pointing it at and asking it to guess answers based on. And then that it becomes more important that content is correct in the first place. It worries me when I hear people talking about pointing an AI at literally everything that they've ever collected in terms of their data, because it's like, well then, like, why wouldn't it give an answer that's completely wrong, completely out of date, talking about a completely different part of your company, if you haven't framed it correctly so that it knows where to look and what to return, then yeah, that's why you're getting nonsense back.
Every year we're publishing the State of Strategic Response Management report, and the theme is really highlighting what leaders do differently and how to continue to elevate the visibility and impact of strategic response management functions and teams. What are you seeing leading organizations or, leaders of bidding functions doing differently that helps them stand out from the pack?
So I think the big change that I've seen recently, and I see it going more that way as well, is when I first got into bidding, it very much felt like every organization, the bid team were the superheroes. We somehow managed to respond to these impossibly large and complex documents with hundreds of questions in a ridiculously short time frame, and to a level of quality that other people just couldn't imagine was possible. And I think many of us, including myself at the time, absolutely loved that superhero sense. And we would all get together and brag about how late we stayed up that week and how many hours we'd worked, and as a sort of badge of honor. And I think over time I've started to see that start to fade away. We're getting much more into, well, actually, how do we achieve all of those things, but keeping in mind our own well-being, and thinking about our mental health, thinking about our longevity in the profession, and avoiding burnout. And I think the leaders that I'm seeing do really well at it are really caring for their teams, and caring for their team's personal development, caring for how they're feeling, making sure that they're not overwhelmed and we're not kind of working too much on too many things. And then really reaping the benefits of, well, what you get is a much more refreshed, better thinking, and much happier bid team that's gonna come across in the proposals and RFP responses that go out to the clients as well. I think that's probably, just taking that to the next step, that's probably the next big thing for us.
That's true in any profession, but it's time to shed the badge of honor and actually be more selective, invest in self-care. And I didn't hear you say the piece about being more selective, but I'm curious your views on this, because I think that's part of it. Like, you have to draw the line somewhere to be able to say, it's, staying up till 2 a.m. to do more for more people doesn't make sense. This is not about people pleasing. This is about driving the business to drive revenue. What's your thought on kind of that role, and how bid teams can evolve to step into more of that position?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly as a bid manager in the past, the worst and most depressing job that I had to do was working on bids I just knew we couldn't win. And we'd been through a bid process, and we'd looked at the data, and we'd looked at what we thought was possible. And generally as a business, we decided that this wasn't for us. And then there's always somebody that just goes, yeah, but I want to do it anyway. And you end up working on something, you think, well, what's the point? I can't win this, but I still have some professional pride in that it's still going to be an amazing proposal, even though it's not going to be a winner. But I found that physically hard to do, and very, very draining, in a way that there isn't the same excitement when you're working on a really good bid that you actually think you have a chance of winning, and you can really pour your your heart and soul into. And so I think being much more selective is important, and I think even more so as we've adopted technology and AI. And where that message comes across about, look, how we can save time with technology. Time saving is not a benefit until we decide what we're going to use the time for. And if we're just going to use the time to bid more opportunities, and particularly to bid more lower quality opportunities that we can't win, then we haven't saved any time at all. We're hurting our people and potentially hurting our reputation in the market as well. So if we can use that time saving, turn that around, make that about being better, focusing on quality, then absolutely, I think we can produce bid teams that are much more selective, much more successful, and much happier in their work as well.
Most of what I hear in the market is we know instinctively because we've been doing this for so long. If you show me a bid, I'll tell you whether you can win it or not. But usually that probably doesn't carry as much weight, right? As much as saying, hey, look, in this particular industry, which this bid is, we haven't won a single bid over the past 5 years or whatever it may be, to bring more of that data and strategic thinking into those initial stages. I actually heard someone say last week, we're teaching sales how to do their jobs better. And, I think that's one view. You could also say we're strengthening the partnership. But that's really what it's about, because whatever function you work in, no one really wants to burn their energy on something that's not going to pan out. And so the more that partnership and that dialogue exists up front, to your point, you're actually spend time on things that matter, and it'll feel better for everyone on that team, because it isn't just an individual bid manager, proposal manager. You're really investing on behalf of the company because you've got all these other contributors as a part of that process.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's it's a kind of clash of cultures, really. I think, but it always used to be a numbers game. They would say it was a numbers game, right? The more calls that you make, the more leads that you chase down, the more meetings that you have, and the more opportunities come out of that. While that may or may not be true purely in a sales sense, in bidding that's not true at all, because now suddenly you're talking about a much bigger investment, and it's not about the quantity, it's about the quality that's coming through, and picking where we're going to invest our time and our people, to maximize our chances of winning the biggest opportunities that we can. And where we don't do that, I think that we then also hurt our people, and and we're not successful as an organization. The sales and bidding are, I think, quite different, even though we ultimately are on the same team and working towards the same goal.
As we've discussed, this is a revenue driving function. Some organizations run 100% of their business through bids, but on average, it's a sizable percentage. We saw about 50% in last year's report. How do bid teams really kind of report on the right things to the right people to demonstrate that impact? What's your view on that?
Yeah, I think it's a debate that's been going on for a little while, isn't it? About how do we get good metrics? I'm a big believer that win rate is a terrible metric for the bid profession, for a number of reasons. We're not wholly responsible for the win rate. And it is based heavily on selection. The best way to improve your win rate is to bid a lot less. Only bid on the ones you definitely know you're definitely going to win, and you get 100% win rate, and that's easy, right? So it just doesn't work as a really valuable metric. But I think where we need to go, and I don't have the answers to this either, but I think where we need to go is towards much more quality-based metrics, so we can really understand why we're winning, why we're not winning, and then use that information to figure out, well, then what do we not bid anymore? What do we let go? Or how do we, if there's a market, as you were saying earlier, if there's a market that we've never won in before, but we want to get into that market, then what do we need to change? What do we need to do that's different with our product, with our marketing, with the way that we go to market with those products, and within our bids as well. Then what's necessary to turn us into a winning organisation in that particular sector, and then we can start bidding those once we've put those things in place. But continuously just bidding, hoping that eventually one day you'll get lucky, is not the solution. So I think if we can work towards much more quality-based metrics where we really understand not just what we're winning, and but much more about how we're winning or not winning opportunities, then we can actually do something about it. It's much more useful data to us. That means we can change things, we can make improvements, and we can get better. And I don't think things like win rate have ever really done that for us.
Well, that is a great place to end because that really hits on the opportunity moving forward to really think about how does the information and intelligence in your response system and your team help the organization, help the team be more strategic, drive commercial and product strategy. I love that example that you gave. And that's the future. So tons of opportunity out there. Thank you so much for taking the time today. I learned so much from this conversation, and it was a pleasure to sit down with you.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Really enjoyed it.